Good evening, I'm Frank Reynolds, and this is World News Tonight. Libya's Colonel Gaddafi has done some verbal saber rattling. The Reagan administration has issued yet another explanation about the presence of an American aircraft carrier near Libya and those AWACS planes in Egypt. And our Pentagon correspondent, John McWethy, who first broke the story on this broadcast last night, has learned more details about what's been happening out there. Here's his report.
After 3 days of operations near the Gulf of Sidra off Libya, Pentagon sources say the aircraft carrier Nimitz and its 3 escort ships have now taken up position off the coast of Egypt. These sources say the Nimitz has no specific destination, that for the moment it will stay where it is. That means its aircraft will never be more than a few minutes flying time from the coast of Libya. Government sources tell ABC News that earlier this week, while the Nimitz was on station in international waters near the Gulf of Sidra, radar contact was made with 2 Libyan MiG-23 fighters. The aircraft approached to within 60 miles of the Nimitz, which carries 85 of its own fighters. Sources say the MiGs turned back when the American F-14s went after them. There was no shooting. 2 weeks ago, Libya issued an international notice to all aircraft, reasserting its exclusive air rights over the Gulf of Sidra. Sources say one of the reasons the Nimitz was in those waters was to challenge Libya's assertion. The 4 AWACS early warning planes, temporarily based near Cairo, are today continuing to patrol the Libyan-Egyptian border. AWACS radar can detect low-flying aircraft out to a range of 250 miles and all other planes to 350 miles, giving the U.S. a view well inside Libya. Earlier this week, key members of Congress were secretly briefed on the threat to Sudan and on accelerated Libyan aid to rebels in Chad, but were told evidence strongly pointed toward a move against Sudan.
We have known Gaddafi to be a continual troublemaker in that part of the world. And anytime there appears to be something that's a little destabilizing over there, I think we have to be on the alert.
Pentagon sources say there has been no lessening of concern in the last 24 hours, that the U.S. still regards the threat from Libya as serious. John McWethy, ABC News, the Pentagon.
Well, if anything is happening down at the junction of Libya, the Sudan, Chad, and Egypt, the Egyptians are publicly pleading ignorance. It would not, however, be good for Egypt's image to be seen preparing any military move with the United States against a brother Arab state, even Libya. Today, the Egyptians have said there are no joint military maneuvers with the United States. Egyptians are simply being trained on the early warning AWACS, and that their presence has nothing to do with any Libyan threat to Sudan. There's been virtual silence from Sudan itself, and from Colonel Gaddafi, only a mild warning to the United States. From Tripoli, here's ABC's Al Dale.
Colonel Gaddafi made his sometimes impassioned speech describing what he sees as American aggression against Libya before a session of the Libyan People's Congress. He declared defiantly that Libya will not allow America or any other country to breach Libyan soil or its waters, including the Gulf of Sidra, which is called the Gulf of Sirte here. And he said they, the people, must be prepared to defend themselves.
The United States is moving in. This is within Libya. We will not allow it, no matter what. We will not allow the United States to enter the Gulf of Sirte, because this is Libyan soil. And not only the United States, but everyone else.
Colonel Gaddafi connected the U.S. military movement to support for Israel against the Arabs and asked his audience, did we ask the United States to sell arms to them so they can destroy us? There was no mention of his own reported troop movements, including a buildup on the border Libya shares with Egypt and the Sudan. And so far there appears to be little overt reaction among the people here to the current flap. No fervor has been whipped up comparable to the last U.S.-Libyan entanglement. Al Dale, ABC News, Tripoli.
Here in Washington, administration officials worked hard today to clear up some of the confusion about the Libyan affair. White House correspondent Sam Donaldson has this report.
The confusion began last night with the president. When asked about the reported ship movements and AWACS exercise, his bottom line was this.
Well, I don't believe that there's been any naval movement of any kind, but the AWACS, this is not an unusual happening, and there, as I say, has been no naval movement at all.
That statement, that there had been no naval movements at all, turned out to be wrong. Within minutes, a White House official who declined to be identified confirmed that the Nimitz had, quote, been in and out of the Gulf of Sidra. And this morning, Deputy Press Secretary Larry Speake said the president was totally aware of all this. He ordered it. This afternoon, however, another senior administration official who declined to be identified said the president did not order the Nimitz movement, only the AWACS exercise. And while the Nimitz had moved near Libya, it had not operated in the Gulf of Sidra. As for the purpose of U.S. movements, the president, when asked last night if he would use American forces to stop Gaddafi if necessary, gave this reply.
I don't think there's any occasion for that. It's never been contemplated. We don't have any forces in that area that would be involved.
On the other hand, today's senior White House official said one purpose of the exercises was to reduce tension created by Libya, demonstrate U.S. resolve, and said the official, if there is some violence tomorrow, we are ready for it. White House officials yesterday tried to get ABC News to delay reporting the story. And when they failed, it apparently took them a while to perfect their public response. Sam Donaldson, ABC News, the White House.
Later in this broadcast, a report on the Oscar nominations, 11 of them for one film, Gandhi. And in part 4 of our special series on crime in America, Richard Threlkeld tonight focuses on the police, the front line in the war on crime.
In North Dakota, lawmen sealed off an entire small prairie town today in their hunt for a man accused of killing 2 U.S. Marshals. Officers armed with rifles set up roadblocks for 5 hours around Ashley, North Dakota, then searched 3 homes of people believed to be sympathetic to tax protester Gordon Kahl. They did not find him. Late last year, a riot broke out in the Overtown section of Miami after a policeman shot and killed a young black man in a video arcade. Today, a grand jury investigating the circumstances of that disturbance indicted the policeman. Mark Parter reports.
If convicted of the manslaughter charge, Miami policeman Luis Alvarez could face a maximum 30-year prison term. Though offering no explanation, the grand jury accused him of negligence in the shooting death 2 months ago of 20-year-old Neville Johnson. Johnson's death led to a 3-day disturbance in Miami's predominantly black Overtown area. Before indicting Alvarez, the grand jury visited the game room where police say Alvarez accidentally shot Johnson during a search. Today, the arcade owner praised the grand jury.
Well, I think in the results of the investigation that justice is served.
But some police officers believe Alvarez is being made a scapegoat to quiet the black community.
We believe that when all the facts are presented to a jury, that Officer Alvarez will be vindicated.
Alvarez had no comment today, but his attorney claims the indictment is the result of political pressures put on the case. Mark Potter, ABC News, Miami.
The situation in Miami is highly unusual, and however it turns out, it's worth noting that in Miami and every other American community, large and small, the police want to be known as the friend and protector of the people, which is exactly what they're supposed to be and what most of them try to be. But it's not easy. Tonight, in the 4th of his 10-part series on crime in America, Richard Threlkeld reports on the police.
Here in Chicago, or most any place, big or small in America these days, if you have more trouble than you can handle, you can go to a phone, dial 3 numbers, and get right through to the police.
Attention cars on Citywide, we have a battery in progress, 1347 East on 87th Street, a burglary in progress.
And this is where your emergency winds up, in a room full of Chicago police dispatchers, trying to handle everybody's emergencies. Big ones like burglary and robbery and homicide, and little ones.
Some driver needs assistance backing up his truck.
Moving a truck that's blocking a driveway or quieting a too noisy trombonist, troubleshooting everybody's little troubles. That's the sort of police work that is wasted work for public servants sworn to protect us. Often enough, there's trouble somewhere on the 18th Police District on the near north side. Sergeant Bob Trews walks a beat here. He likes being a cop.
It is a prestigious job. As much as people like to tease you about being a policeman, they still like you. Everybody likes the policeman around.
Everyone but the bad guys, of course, but if you spend any time around the 18th District House or any police station anywhere, you'll soon see the police don't devote much time to nabbing bad guys. There's a lot of paperwork for the lawyers and insurance companies, more busy work. In our ABC News crime poll, 3 out of 4 approve of the job their cops are doing, but 2 out of 3 wish they'd spend more time stopping crime. There are now almost 500,000 policemen spread around 18,000 police agencies in this country, and still we haven't put much of a dent in the major crime rate. Nationwide, they solve only about half the muggings and rapes, less than a fourth of the robberies, and only about 1 in 7 burglaries and car thefts.
Why don't the police do better? 70% of our ABC News poll sample think it's because they are handcuffed by the courts. Not so. Rules of evidence, arrest procedures interfere with police work in only a tiny fraction of cases, 1%. True, we don't spend nearly as much money on our police, but they had just as much trouble catching crooks when we spent more. Maybe it's time we stop thinking of them as just crime fighters.
I don't think whether you have police in one-car or two-car patrols, or whether you have exclusionary rules or don't, and certainly whether you have capital punishment or don't, you're going to make a damn difference. They keep using the wrong measures of success here. The success should be efficiency, decency, proper balance between state authority and individual freedom, and anxious concern for victims.
If we've come to expect our cops to be Dick Tracy, the cops have only themselves to blame. They didn't start out that way. Back in 1845, when the first real police department was organized in New York City, the cops were constables, peace officers charged with keeping peace and quiet and helping the solid citizens fight crime, not doing it for them. That all changed after World War II. The cop on the beat got into a patrol car, got a police radio, and became a professional crime fighter.
Police are singing a much different tune now, but the police have said, leave it up to us. We're crime-fighting professionals, and if you see something, call us, but don't become involved yourself.
George Kelling is a criminologist with Harvard's Kennedy School of Government.
The result is citizens have been actively discouraged from exerting social control in the streets, and I think that's a tragedy in our society.
Despite what you see on the TV now and then, cops don't spend much of their time being Dick Tracy. 80% of what they really do is mundane peacekeeping, much as they did a century ago.
It's a 99% people-oriented type job. A real policeman is someone who does make mistakes, who doesn't always get the bad guy, like they do on television.
We're frustrated a lot.
And being a real policeman can be very monotonous at times.
I've been a policeman for 14 years. I've only fired my gun one time in a performance of my duty. So it's not bang, bang, and shoot 'em up.
The weekend we spent with officers Michael and Dominic, there were no shoot-'em-ups, and they didn't catch one single crook. That's normal.
You can't be in every place all the time. It's virtually impossible. Even if you had a policeman on every corner, I would venture to say that you couldn't stop crime.
But they did investigate a reported kidnapping that turned out to be just an argument. They went to see a woman who'd just been mugged and said they'd see what they could do about it. They chatted with a fellow who was causing trouble in a fast food shop and nudged him on his way. And they helped pack some suspected prostitutes off to the pokey. They didn't enforce the law much. They enforced a standard of behavior, and they kept things from getting out of control.
So we think that if the police concentrate more on disorder, that a lot of disorderly events will not lead into criminal events. You'll keep it at the beginning, and you'll increase the total amount of social control operating on the streets.
Citizens themselves are beginning to take a hand in that. Crime Watch programs like this one in Detroit have begun sprouting all over the country. Unarmed citizens' patrols keep watch over their streets and apartment complexes and call the police if there's something suspicious. An estimated 5 million Americans are now involved in one Crime Watch program or another in 20,000 communities, and they're credited with cutting the crime rate from Detroit to Winter Park, Florida. What the police, what all of us have learned in 2 decades of trying to fight crime is that no matter how elite, how professional they are, the cops can't protect us all by themselves. So America's peace officers and its solid citizens are going to have to get reacquainted. We'll have to stop expecting the police to be our babysitters. For their part, the police are going to have to get back on the beat and meet the rest of us halfway. Tomorrow, we'll find out what happens to the criminals the cops do catch, why so many of them don't go straight to jail or even go to trial. In the halls of justice, more often than not, the justice is out in the halls. Richard Threlkeld, ABC News, Chicago.
Tonight, 2020, will continue our series on crime in America with a report on the psychological effects on police who are forced to use their weapons in the line of duty.
Elsewhere overseas today, those disastrous fires in Australia. Arsonists are being blamed for some of the brush fires. which are still sweeping across drought-stricken southeastern portions of the country. They've been the country's worst fires in almost half a century. Firefighters have given up trying to save property. All we can do now, they say, is try to save people. Most of the fire is now under control, but the task of counting the dead continues. The final death toll is likely to be in the 70s. More than 2,000 homes have been destroyed when small fires joined up to become enormous blazes, consuming everything in their path. An area as large as Connecticut has been ravaged. Entire towns have simply disappeared. And here in London today, the value of a Nobel Peace Prize medal. It was sold at auction for $12,000. The British author and pacifist Sir Norman Angell won it in 1933. He willed it to his secretary when he died in 1967. She sent it to Sotheby's, the auction house, and Angell's nephew bought it. He said he wanted it back in the family. Frank?
He once ran a successful campaign for another candidate to capture the Democratic presidential nomination. George McGovern was an underdog in 1972 when Gary Hart steered him through the primaries and eventually to victory at the convention. Of course, the election that year was another matter. But now, a United States Senator in his own right and a candidate on his own, Gary Hart began his run for the White House. We have this report from Sandra Van Oker.
Gary Hart went home to Denver to announce his candidacy today.
I believe the American people are ready to go on the march again. They sense the passage we must make between two worlds, the world of our parents and the one we will leave to our children.
The announcement was beamed out from Denver via the Westar 4 satellite, in effect a video press release that could be picked up by stations all over the country. In addition, for stations that may run the announcement on a delayed basis, Hart sat in his office Tuesday, putting taglines on the announcement directed specifically at next year's primary states.
As I said when I announced my candidacy in Denver, I intend to take my campaign to all 50 states, including New Hampshire.
In fact, starting Sunday night and running at least 3 times next week, the Yankee Cable Network will broadcast the tape to the 60,000 New Hampshire homes on its cable system. But in traditional New Hampshire, along with the new technology of politics, there is also the old. A headquarters for Mondale, who declares next Monday, and phone calls for Hart, who will visit New Hampshire this weekend.
Senator Hart will be in town on Saturday, and I'd like to invite you to his announcement party.
And this week, more than a year away from the New Hampshire primary, there were old-fashioned, low-tech organizational meetings for Hart in farmhouses.
There will be a working organization in every town and city in New Hampshire by the fall.
Hart will use the wholesale method of reaching voters here through the new technology of politics. But he and his opponents also know that this state can only be won on a retail basis, through personal contact and political organization. Nothing more, nothing less. Sandra Van Oker, ABC News, Bedford, New Hampshire.
White House spokesman Larry Speakes took some time today to clarify another remark by the president last night, this one concerning a congressional subpoena of EPA documents on the cleanup of toxic waste sites. The president seemed to suggest that he will give Congress the documents it wants, which could mean an end to the contempt of Congress citation for the EPA administrator, Ann Gorsuch. But Speakes said today the president is standing by his claim of executive privilege on that. However, a compromise seems to be in the works, but the White House is offering only to let Congress see the documents, not keep them.
Economic news now. Ford lost $658 million last year, the 3rd year in a row the automaker has lost money. New claims for jobless benefits fell a bit during the first week in February, but they were still above 500,000, a sign the nation's unemployment rate will probably remain high. However, factory use showed a slight improvement last month for the first time in almost a year, up 0.5%. But that still leaves idle about 1/3 of this nation's factory capacity. Then there's this statue. Even though it's only gold-plated, it's worth millions of dollars to those who win one, the Oscar. Today, the movie industry took its first step toward this year's Academy Awards. Stephen Gear reports.
It's impossible to win without first being nominated. And although the Academy's nomination ceremony is a simple one for press and press agents, there is a glory that will adhere to all the nominees until April 11th when the winners are announced. So until then, the greatest glory goes to Gandhi, with 11 nominations, including Best Picture and Best Actor. In a sense, Ben Kingsley was born to the role. His real name is Krishna Banji, and his family came from the village where Gandhi was born.
I beg you to accept that there is no people on earth who would not prefer their own bad government to the good government of an alien power.
Tootsie came in second in the nomination race with 10, including Best Picture and Best Actor. Dustin Hoffman is Tootsie, although no one would have guessed it, not even his agent.
I'm the new woman administrator on Southwest General.
You
ought to
what?
Congratulate me. They almost didn't hire me because they thought I looked too feminine.
Strangely enough, Tootsie was not nominated in the makeup category. E.T. is third, 9 nominations with a bid for Best Picture. Steven Spielberg was nominated as Best Director. The Verdict is another film nominated as Best Picture, and Paul Newman is a nominee for Best Actor. The last of the Best Picture bids went to Missing, with both Jack Lemmon and Sissy Spacek in the top acting categories. Peter O'Toole, in My Favorite Year, rounds out the Best Actor nominations. Getting back to Best Actress, Julie Andrews was picked for Victor Victoria, Meryl Streep for Sophie's Choice, Deborah Winger for An Officer and a Gentleman, and Jessica Lange was named not only for her starring role in Frances, but also for her supporting role in Tootsie. Nominations are one thing, winning is another. Remember Reds last year? It had 12 nominations. It won 3 Oscars. Stephen Gear, ABC News, Hollywood.
Once again, tonight's top story, the U.S. aircraft carrier Nimitz, after 3 days near the Libyan coast, has now moved to a position just off Egypt. And ABC's Pentagon correspondent John McWethy has learned that earlier this week, 2 Libyan jets flew to within 60 miles of the Nimitz, but turned away when challenged by American fighter planes. There was no shooting. Later tonight, Nightline continues our examination of crime in America. That's our report for now on World News Tonight. This is Frank Reynolds. For ABC News, good night from Washington.